It was the spring of 1429. The city of Orleans stood under siege. For 6 months, the English had surrounded its walls, hoping to choke off French resistance once and for all. The 100 Years' War, that long and bitter struggle between two crowns, had already devoured a century of blood. But then, from the east, a strange sight approached the gates. A teenage girl on horseback, clad in white armor, untrained in war, unknown to court. Her banner held high. Her name was Joan. She claimed to be sent by God. She claimed to hear saints. She claimed she would lift the siege, crown the Dauphin of France, and drive the English from the soil of her homeland. It was madness. It was also exactly what France needed. Joan of Arc, peasant girl, prophet, warrior, heretic, saint, would change the course of a war. And of history, Joan was born around 1412 in the small village of Domrémy in eastern France. Her family were peasants, humble, devout, and tied to the rhythms of farm life. She never learned to read or write. She had no military training, no connection to nobility, but she grew up in a world torn by war. France was fractured. The English controlled much of the north. The Burgundians, powerful French allies of the English, held even more. The rightful heir, the Dauphin Charles, was disinherited by the Treaty of Troyes. To many, he was a king in name only. It was a kingdom of despair. And in that despair, Joan began to hear voices. She was 13 when they first came. She said they were Saints Michael the Archangel, Catherine of Alexandria, Margaret of Antioch. They spoke to her with gentleness. Then urgency. God had a task for her. They said she was to drive the English out of France. She was to lead the Dauphin to Reims, where he would be crowned in the Cathedral of Kings. At first, she told no one. But the voices returned, and they did not stop at 16. Joan left Domrémy. She made her way to the nearby town of Vaucouleurs, demanding to see the local garrison commander. She told him simply, "God wills that I go to the Dauphin." She was dismissed, mocked, sent home, but she returned, persistent, strange, impossible to ignore. Eventually, the commander relented. Joan was sent to Chinon, where the Dauphin Charles held his disheveled court to test her. Charles disguised himself in the crowd, but Joan picked him out immediately. She told him what only he had prayed in private, and she told him that God had chosen him to be king. Charles did not yet believe, but he could not dismiss her either. In March 1429, after weeks of questioning by theologians, Joan was declared free of heresy. She was given armor, a sword, a standard of white linen embroidered with lilies, and the image of Christ. She took command of an escort and rode toward Orleans. She was 17 years old. A girl had entered the war. Joan arrived at Orleans on April 29, 1429. The French garrison was skeptical. The generals ignored her advice, but Joan's presence electrified the soldiers. She spoke with conviction. She prayed constantly. She seemed to embody something they had lost hope. She led assaults on English forts. She carried her banner into the thick of battle. She was wounded by an arrow to the shoulder and returned to fight the next day. On May 8th, the siege was lifted. The English retreated. Joan had delivered the first major French victory in years. She did not pause after Orleans. Joan pressed Charles to march to Reims deep in enemy territory. It was the traditional site of coronation for French kings. The army hesitated. The nobles debated. But Joan insisted. Along the way, towns opened their gates. Garrison after garrison fell or surrendered. No force could stop her momentum or her message. On July 17, 1429, in the cathedral at Reims, Charles was crowned King of France. Joan stood at his side, banner in hand, weeping. Her mission, she believed, was complete, but the war was not. Overdawed, Joan wanted to push onward. She argued for an attack on Paris, still held by the English and Burgundians, but now the court pulled away. The king grew cautious. His advisors mistrusted Joan's growing fame. In September, she led an assault on Paris and failed. By 1430, her forces were reduced. Her enemies were watching. On May 23rd, near the town of Compiègne, Joan was captured by Burgundian forces. She was held prisoner and then sold to the English. They did not want ransom. They wanted her silenced. Joan was taken to Rouen. The English, unable to defeat her in battle, would now destroy her with law. Her trial began in January 1431, conducted by French clergy loyal to the English crown. It was not a trial of evidence, but of politics and theology. She was charged with heresy, witchcraft, and cross-dressing for wearing men's armor in battle. Joan held her ground. For months, she endured interrogation, isolation, and threats of torture. She answered with clarity, humility, and defiance. When asked if she believed she was in God's grace, a question meant to trap her, she replied, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may He keep me there." But the outcome was already decided. On May 30th, 1431, Joan was led into the marketplace of Rouen. She was 19. She asked for a cross. A priest held it before her as she was tied to the stake. She called out to Christ as the flames rose. Her ashes were cast into the Seine to erase any relic, any memory. But her memory would not die. 20-5 years later, a retrial was held. Joan was declared innocent. Her accusers condemned in 1920. She was canonized as a saint by the Catholic Church. Today, Joan of Arc is a national heroine of France. Her face appears in paintings, her story in books, her name on streets and churches. But beyond the symbols lies something quieter and deeper. Joan was not a warrior by birth. She was not educated, nor political, nor powerful. She was a peasant girl who believed that the voice of heaven could speak to someone like her. And in believing it, she changed history. She gave courage to a broken nation. She turned visions into victories. She fought not for glory, but for conviction. Joan of Arc, saint martyr, soldier, walked alone into fire and rose into legend.